The notification came through while I was 30,000 feet in the air, somewhere over the Midwest, halfway home from a work conference in Seattle. I almost didn't look at it. I'd spent 3 days presenting to clients, barely sleeping, living on airport coffee and granola bars, and my phone had been buzzing non-stop with work emails I was planning to ignore until Monday. But something made me tap the screen. Maybe instinct, maybe fate, maybe just the particular way the banking app icon sat there, pulsing gently like a warning light on a dashboard. Account balance, $312.44. I stared at the number. Then I stared at it again, the way you stare at a word you've read so many times it stops looking real. 12 days ago, that account had held $94,000. I remember the exact sound the man next to me made, a soft snore. Completely unbothered as I sat there in 24B with my hands going cold and the cabin lights dimmed around me and the entire architecture of my financial life collapsing somewhere between clouds. My grandmother had left me that money. She passed 2 years ago, quiet and dignified in the way she had lived. And the account had been her final act of love toward me, specifically not toward my brother, not toward my parents, toward me. She had told me once, the summer before she got sick, that I was the only one who ever actually listened when she talked. I thought she was just being sweet. Turns out she was being deliberate. I scrolled through the transaction history with shaking fingers. Withdrawal, withdrawal, transfer, transfer, withdrawal. All in the past 11 days, all while I was in Seattle, all in amounts just under $10,000, small enough, I realized with a wave of nausea, to avoid the automatic flags banks place on larger transactions. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. My phone buzzed again. A text from my brother. "Hey, just letting you know, I borrowed a little from that account Grandma left you. Family emergency. We'll pay it back. Don't overreact. Don't overreact." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I turned off my phone screen, pressed my forehead against the cold oval of the airplane window, and breathed slowly into the dark until the shaking in my hands moved somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter, somewhere that felt less like panic and more like the very first edge of something I didn't yet have a name for. By the time the wheels touched down, I had a name for it. I called my friend Diane the second I got into my car in the short-term lot. Diane was a paralegal at a firm downtown, sharp and unsentimental in all the ways I needed right now. $94,000, I said, before she even finished saying hello. My grandmother's inheritance. It's gone. My brother texted me and said he borrowed it. There was a pause. Claire. Her voice dropped. Don't touch anything in that account. Don't transfer. Don't move anything. Don't respond to your brother. Get to the bank first thing tomorrow and ask specifically about how the access happened. Then you call a real attorney, not me, a real one. Do you hear me? I heard her. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, and my grandmother's account documents spread around me. The originals she'd mailed me after we visited the estate attorney together, the ones I'd filed in a manila folder labeled important and tucked into the back of my filing cabinet because I was 29 years old and still half believed the things in important folders were things that would never actually need to be important. The account had been set up as a transfer on death savings account, named solely to me. There was no co-signer. There was no joint access. There was no legal mechanism by which anyone else should have been able to withdraw a single dollar from it. So I kept asking myself the same question in the dark, while the city hummed outside my window. How? The bank manager the next morning was a careful woman named Miss Okafor, and she had the specific expression of someone who had seen this before, not shocked, not dismissive, just very, very careful. She pulled up the account on her screen. She looked at the transaction history. She looked at me. Then she said, quietly, "Someone presented identification and a notarized authorization form claiming to act on your behalf." I set my coffee down on the edge of her desk. "I didn't authorize anyone. The form states that you did." She turned the monitor toward me slightly. "It was submitted in person. The signature matches your file." I looked at the signature. It had my name on it. It had the right loops, the right slant, the particular way I've always crossed the double E in my last name. It wasn't mine. I knew it the same way you know your own reflection, not because I'd memorized every detail, but because something in the wrongness registered before my brain caught up. The pressure was too even. The letters were too careful. My actual handwriting is impatient, always in a hurry, always leaning slightly forward like it's trying to get somewhere faster. This signature stood very still. "I need a copy of that form," I said. Miss Okafor nodded. She already had it printing. I called the attorney Diane recommended from the parking lot of the bank. Her name was Patricia Wells, and she picked up on the second ring and said, "Tell me everything," in the tone of someone who meant it literally. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Okay. First thing, this is bank fraud. Potentially forgery. Definitely unauthorized access to a financial account. This isn't a family disagreement, Claire. This is a crime." Something in my chest cracked open a little at the word crime. Not because it surprised me, because hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way my own brain had been resisting since 24B. "My brother texted me that it was a family emergency," I said. "That's not a legal defense," Patricia said. "What was the emergency?" I didn't know yet. I was about to find out. "My brother called me that evening. I let it ring twice, then answered, because Patricia had told me to document everything, and because some part of me still, stupidly, needed to hear him explain himself in his own words. Needed to believe there was an explanation that made sense. "Before you say anything," he started. "Go ahead," I said. He did. He talked for almost 8 minutes. The short version was this. He'd gotten into debt. Business debt, he said, from a startup that hadn't worked out. Except the amounts he'd described, $94,000 in losses, plus interest, plus penalties, didn't quite add up to a failed business. They added up to something else. Something faster and less structured and harder to explain at a family dinner table. "I was going to pay it back before you even noticed," he said. "I knew you weren't checking that account regularly." "How did you access it?" I asked. My voice was calm. I was proud of that. He paused. "Dad helped me. We found some paperwork in their files. It looked like a general power of attorney you'd signed years ago when you had that car accident. Before you moved to the city, Dad thought it was still valid." I closed my eyes. I had signed a power of attorney when I was 23. I'd been in a minor accident. Nothing serious, but my parents had panicked and insisted I sign something so they could help manage my affairs if anything happened while I was recovering. I'd signed it to calm them down. I hadn't looked at it since. I assumed it had expired, the way those things do. I assumed it didn't cover financial accounts I hadn't owned yet. I assumed, most foolishly of all, that even if it technically said something it shouldn't, my family would never actually use it. "That document was for medical decisions," I said, "during a specific recovery period, 8 years ago. It didn't have an expiration date," my brother said. "It also didn't cover accounts that didn't exist when I signed it." He was quiet. "Did Mom know?" I asked. Another pause. She knew we were trying to handle the situation. I ended the call. I forwarded the transcript I'd been recording. Patricia had told me to Patricia's email. Then I sat in my apartment and didn't move for a long time. Here's what I kept coming back to. They didn't ask. Not once. My brother knew he was in financial trouble for Patricia, would later uncover at least 14 months before the withdrawals. My parents knew too. And in all that time, with all those dinners and phone calls and birthday texts and check-ins, not one of them said, "We're struggling." Not one of them said, "Could you help?" They decided, at some point, that asking was riskier than taking. That my reaction to a request might be, no. And so, they eliminated the variable. They didn't want my help. They wanted my money, and they wanted it without having to look me in the eye. Patricia filed a fraud complaint with the bank the next morning. By noon, the account was flagged and under investigation. By the following day, she had pulled the original power of attorney from my parents' county records. My parents had filed a copy when they used it at the bank and sent it to a document analyst named Dr. Farrow, who was apparently the kind of person who spent his days doing exactly what I needed him to do. His findings came back in 48 hours. The power of attorney I'd signed at 23 had not been altered, but the copy my parents presented to the bank had 2 additional paragraphs that did not appear in the original. Paragraphs that expanded the scope of authorization to include financial accounts. Paragraphs written in a slightly different font that only became visible when the documents were placed under magnification. Someone had added language to a legal document I'd signed. Someone had modified a contract in my name, without my knowledge, and used it to drain the inheritance my grandmother had spent her life saving for me. Patricia called me when she got Dr. Farrow's report. Her voice had the particular quality of someone working very hard to stay professional about something that made them personally furious. "This is not just fraud, Claire," she said. "This is forgery. This is a federal offense. I need you to understand that before we move forward, because once we file this, it cannot be unfiled." "File it," I said. I want to tell you that I felt strong in that moment. I did, a little. But I also cried that night, the kind of crying that isn't about sadness exactly, but about grief. Grief for the family I'd believed in for 32 years. Grief for the grandmother who'd trusted me with the most careful gift she could give, and who deserved better than having it stolen by the people who had stood at her funeral and held my hand and told me she was at peace. She'd left it to me on purpose. They knew that. They took it anyway. My mother called 3 days after Patricia filed. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was soft and practiced, the voice she uses when she's already decided you're the problem, but she's willing to be gracious about it anyway. "Sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your brother was in a very difficult situation. We made a judgment call. You've always been the stable one. We knew you could handle this. Call me back so we can talk about this like adults." The stable one. I played it twice, because I wanted to make sure I'd heard correctly. They had taken $94,000 from me, and their explanation was that I could handle it, that my stability was their justification, that my competence was the thing that made me safe to steal from. I forwarded the voicemail to Patricia and did not call back. The investigation took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of bank records and document analysis and statements and subpoenas. 6 weeks of my parents leaving messages that cycled through every emotional register, apologetic, then wounded, then accusatory, then strangely cheerful, as if the whole thing might resolve itself if everyone just agreed to be reasonable. My brother texted me twice. The first time he said he was sorry. The second time he said I was destroying the family over money. I thought about responding to that. I thought about a lot of things I could have said. What I actually sent back was, "My attorney has advised me not to communicate with you directly. Please contact her office." Patricia kept telling me I was handling it well. I kept not telling her how often I pulled up my grandmother's number in my phone, still saved, still there, and thought about what she would say. My grandmother had been a quiet woman with strong opinions and a very low tolerance for people who confused love with entitlement. I think she would have told me exactly what Patricia was telling me. Hold the line. Let the truth do the work. The hearing was on a Thursday in late October. I wore a dark green blazer I'd bought the week I got my first real promotion, the one that had let me start seriously saving, the one my grandmother had called me about to say she was proud. Patricia met me outside the courthouse. She had a briefcase and a coffee, and the expression of someone completely unbothered by what was about to happen, which was exactly what I needed to see. My parents and brother were already inside. My brother looked like he hadn't slept. My father had the tight jaw of a man who believed very strongly that he was the reasonable party in a situation that had simply gotten out of hand. My mother looked at me the moment I walked in with an expression I recognized, the one that said she was prepared to be very hurt by whatever I did next. I sat down next to Patricia and didn't look at them again. The judge was a man named Judge Calloway, somewhere in his 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who had seen every variety of human mess and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. Patricia opened. She was clean and factual and devastatingly organized. She walked through the original power of attorney, the alterations, Dr. Farrow's findings, the bank records, the transaction timeline. She presented the voicemail my mother had left. She presented the texts from my brother. She presented a financial analysis showing that the withdrawals had been structured deliberately to avoid bank reporting thresholds which, she noted, indicated not a panicked family in crisis but a calculated, deliberate plan. The attorney my parents had hired, a man named Mr. Crane, who seemed to be running on the theory that if he spoke confidently enough the facts might rearrange themselves, argued that my parents had acted in good faith, that the power of attorney had seemed valid to them, that this was a family matter that had been escalated unnecessarily. Judge Calloway looked at him over his reading glasses. Did they alter the document? Mr. Crane adjusted his tie. My clients believed the document reflected the scope of the original agreement. I didn't ask what they believed, the judge said. I asked if they altered it. Mr. Crane said nothing useful. Judge Calloway looked at Patricia. She was ready. Dr. Farrow testified next. He was patient and specific and showed the court exactly what he'd shown me: 2 fonts, slightly different kerning, paragraphs that had been added after the original document was signed. He had done this work for 23 years. He was very calm about it. When he was done, the courtroom felt different, quieter. The kind of quiet that follows a fact landing exactly where it was aimed. My brother testified. He confirmed that he had presented the modified document to the bank. He said he hadn't known it was altered, that my father had handled that part. When Patricia asked him directly if he had known the account belonged solely to me with no cosigner, he said yes. When she asked if he had known I hadn't been contacted for consent, he said yes. The judge was very still for a moment. My father testified last. He was the most painful to watch, not because I pitied him, but because I recognized something in the way he spoke, the genuine belief that the logic of family superseded everything else. That what they had done was, in some fundamental way, not wrong, because they were family, and family shared resources, and I had more than enough, and my brother needed it, and wasn't that what family was for? Judge Calloway let him finish. Then he said, "Mr. Harmon, your daughter did not consent to this. The document used to access her account was altered without her knowledge. Are you aware that modifying a legal instrument constitutes forgery under state law?" My father said he hadn't thought of it that way. "I understand," the judge said, in a tone that meant he did not find this a sufficient response. The ruling came at the end of the day. The court found that the modified power of attorney was fraudulent and legally void. The withdrawals were deemed unauthorized. The bank was ordered to restore the full $94,000, with interest accrued during the investigation period. My parents and brother were held jointly liable for damages, including my legal fees. The case was referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges: forgery, bank fraud, unauthorized financial exploitation. My mother started crying. It was loud and immediate, and I had watched her cry enough times in my life to know the difference between grief and performance. This was somewhere in between. Maybe she was genuinely sorry. Maybe she was sorry they'd gotten caught. I had spent the last 6 weeks trying to decide if there was a meaningful difference, and I'd stopped being sure there was. My brother put his head in his hands. My father stared at the table. I sat very still next to Patricia while the room moved around me. Outside the courthouse, the air was cold and smelled like leaves and exhaust, and the specific kind of afternoon that feels like it's trying to tell you something. Patricia shook my hand. She said I had been excellent throughout all of this, that I'd been patient when it was hard and precise when it mattered. I thanked her. I meant it. My mother caught me on the steps. She grabbed my arm, not threateningly, just desperately, the grip of someone drowning, and said, "Claire, please, talk to me." I stopped. I looked at her. I thought about the voicemail, the stable one, the one who could handle it. "I would have helped him," I said. "If you'd asked me, if anyone had picked up the phone and said he was in trouble, I would have helped." She opened her mouth. "But you didn't ask," I said. "You took. And the reason you took instead of asking is because you already knew what asking looked like. It looked like me having a say, and you didn't want me to have a say. You wanted the money, and you wanted to keep the version of me that stays quiet and handles it." Her face did something complicated. "I'm not that person anymore," I said. "I don't think I ever really was. I just let you believe it." I walked down the courthouse steps. My brother called twice in the following week. I didn't answer. My father sent a letter, an actual paper letter, which I would have found quaint under any other circumstances, saying that he hoped we could move forward as a family, that mistakes had been made, that no one had wanted things to go this far. I read it once, folded it, and filed it in the back of the important folder. Someday, I might want a record of who tried to rewrite the story and how. The bank restored my account balance 11 days after the ruling. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and looked at the number on my phone screen for a long time. $96,240, the original amount plus interest. The same number, more or less, that my grandmother had transferred to me 2 years ago with a handwritten note that said simply, "For your future. I believe in you." I took a picture of the balance. Not to post anywhere, not to send to anyone. Just for me. Just so there was a record somewhere that said, "This is what she meant for you to have. This is what they tried to take. And this is what you got back." I went home and made dinner and watched half a movie I'd been meaning to see for months and fell asleep on my couch somewhere around 9 o'clock, which was the first time I'd fallen asleep before midnight since Seattle. I've thought a lot about the version of me who sat in seat 24B, looking at a bank notification and felt the floor drop out. She was so certain, in that first awful moment, that something irreversible had happened, that something had been permanently broken. And she was right, something had. But it wasn't the account, and it wasn't the inheritance, and it wasn't even the relationship with her family, which had been a particular kind of fiction long before any of this. What broke was the agreement I'd had with myself to keep pretending. To accept the version of me they found useful and call it love. To be the stable one, their phrase, their frame, their quiet permission to keep using me as a floor to stand on while they built their lives. When I think about my grandmother now, I don't think about the money. I think about what she saw, all those years, when she looked at me across a dinner table while the rest of the family talked over each other. She was watching to see who actually stayed, who paid attention, who showed up not because it was convenient but because they wanted to be there. She knew. And she made sure I knew she knew. That's worth more than $94,000. But I held on to the $94,000 anyway, because she meant for me to have it. And because some things you fight for not because of what they're worth, but because of what giving them up would mean. And I have never been very good at giving up what's mine.